Hey guys, it's Mark here, back with another video. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you 5 tips for getting started with hand lettering. These are things that I still do with pretty much every drawing that I do, and I really wish someone had shown me when I was starting out. For the sake of this video, I don't actually have a camera, so I'll be recording myself drawing on my Wacom tablet, but all these things should pretty much be exactly the same in principle anyway if you're using pencil and paper. So, tip number 1. The first tip that I have for you is to always write down whatever you're about to draw. Might seem a bit silly, but if you've got a phrase, especially if it's a long one like 4 or 5 words, definitely write it down just in a rough, all caps like I did here, and number each letter. And this is important because as soon as you do this in your mind, you start to recognize symmetry, and symmetry is really important for a good design. So you might notice that some words are really long, some are really short, and in your mind you can sort of just have a glance at these numbers and see how different words might stack well together. For this example, I chose a really uncreative hello there as my phrase, so they're just five letters each, but yeah, for a more complex phrase, this is super useful. So my second tip is to always draw guidelines. I can't stress this enough. No matter how much lettering I've done, I still always draw guidelines, and if I don't, I always regret it later on, because I can do some hand lettering and just sort of freehand it, and then later on when I look at it up closely, I realize that there are small imperfections that I could have easily avoided if I'd just been a bit less slack and just put together my guidelines. You can always draw these with pen or something on paper or in a Photoshop file like I do, and you can always just save the file and reuse it time and time again anyway. So yeah, can't stress this one enough. So in this example here, I've drawn 4 guidelines. You've got the baseline, which is the bottom of your letters, the X height, which is the top of your lowercase letters, then the ascender and descender. So the bottom of a Y, a lowercase y, for example, might extend down to the descender, and then the top of an H, for example, might extend up to the ascender. Don't worry too much about the technical terms here. Just make sure that you've got the guidelines so that everything's nice and consistent. So my next tip here is another thing that I like to do, and that's I just draw in a little circle where each letter is going to go. And this saves me a lot of time, because if I draw the letters straight up and I get them wrong, I have to rub them out or delete them and start again. But by just quickly popping in these circles, I can already get an idea for exactly how things are going to look. And if you've got multiple words that are stacked on top of each other, this is another really good way to just quickly make sure that you've got the balance right before you commit and spend too much time drawing out the individual letters. It's probably worth keeping in mind though that not all the letters have the same width. So a lowercase L, for example, in a script like in the word hello would be different to a W, for example. So don't use it as a super strict guideline, but it's still really good for just getting a quick general idea. Alrighty, so my next tip is for correcting and spotting mistakes. So you can see here that I've drawn the word hello there, my phrase. At a quick glance, it looks okay, fairly happy with it. So one of the first things I'm going to do is flip the design upside down. And this is really good for spotting mistakes. I guess when you're just drawing and when you're looking at the letters for so long, you almost become blind to your own mistakes, I think. So you can see here that one of the first things I did was flip the design upside down, and straight away, as soon as I'm looking at it upside down, I can start to see some mistakes that I didn't notice before. For example, the L's are at a different angle to the H in the word hello. So that's something that I'd have to correct. I also spotted this little bump in the ligature between the T and the H. And I also noticed that the 2 E's in the word there aren't quite lined up properly. After that, another thing that I like to do is actually invert the colors. I realize that this isn't really something you can do if you've just got pencil on paper. I suppose you could scan it into Photoshop and then flip the colors like this. But again, this just helps to highlight more mistakes that you might not otherwise see. I find this really good for identifying issues with spacing as well between my letters. So as soon as I flip the color levels here, I can start to spot a bunch of mistakes. Some of the letters are far too cramped. For example, the E and the H in the word they're quite close together when you look at the gap between the E and the R and some of the other letters in there, for example. Another thing that I spotted is that the L's aren't quite on the baseline together, which is another bit of a careless mistake. And I also noticed that the E and the R in the word there are sort of a little too close for comfort as well. Alrighty, so my fifth tip, this one's relating to when you're working with lettering that has multiple weights. So a brush script is a really good example of this. And if you have a look here, you can see I've drawn a couple of A's and a couple of H's, and some of them look really awkward compared to the others. And the reason is because the thicker strokes and the thinner strokes are in the wrong place. So basically, whenever we're doing a script that has varying weight like this, like a brush script, anytime we do a stroke that goes downwards, we want that to be thick. That's where we want to apply more pressure if we're using a paintbrush or a brush pen, for example. And that also includes strokes that go sort of diagonally down to the left and also down towards the right. And then anytime that we do a stroke that goes upwards, we want those to be quite thin. And that also includes anything going up to the left or anything up to the right. So if you have a look at these two A's that I've drawn, if you think about it, the very first stroke is usually this one here, and it's usually a downward stroke. So in this case, we want this to be thick. This is where we would apply more pressure. And then the second stroke is usually, I mean, you could break this into two if you wanted to, but it would usually be this one around here. So this stroke is a bit interesting because at the start in this area, we're actually going upwards. So we want this part to be thinner. And then as we go around to the left here, this is where we want to apply pressure because we're going downwards, remember. And then back down here, we're going back up again. So we'd want to lighten off a little bit. And the same goes for the tail down here as well. That's just sort of light because we're going back up. And the reason that this one next to it looks so awkward is because I basically did the exact opposite. So I went really thin on the way down, thick here, really light on the way down again, and then applied more pressure on the way up here. Now if I go across to these two H's that I've drawn, it's really the same thing. So this thick stroke here would be the first one going down. So we want to apply pressure. Then on the way back up here, we want to lighten off a little bit for the second stroke. And then on the way back down again, apply some more pressure and then lighten off at the end. And yeah, again, I did the opposite thing over here. So I went really light on the way down, heavy on the way up, light on the way down, heavy on the way up. And that's why they look so terrible, basically. Alrighty, so there you have it. Those are my 5 tips for getting started with lettering. Those are things that I still do to this day with pretty much every lettering project that I do. And I guess on a final note, I would just say, keep practicing. I know when I started out, I mean, you could flick through my Instagram to, a year ago and look at some of the stuff that I was doing, and it's absolutely atrocious. And I keep it there to remind me how bad it was and how quickly you can progress with this. You just have to make sure that you put in time. I know that I was putting in probably 1 or 2 hours every single night after work, just practicing my lettering and just really drawing every single chance I could. If I was sitting around watching TV, I'd grab a little post-it note, just practice my A's or something, and over time, sure enough, before you know it, it'll just feel really, really natural. And it's really just an hour's game. So if your lettering's not that great just yet, don't stress out too hard. It really is just an hour's game and you'll get there. And if there's anything else you guys would like me to teach, maybe something to do with Illustrator, Photoshop, lettering, painting, you name it, just let me know in the comments or send me a message and I'll see if I can make a video about it. Thanks a lot, guys.